Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where ordinary people step into extraordinary darkness. Tonight we travel to Alaska, a land where the sky burns green and the ground swallows sound. There's something about the endless nights here, the isolation, the storms, the quiet roads that lead nowhere, that breed stories you can't quite shake off. What you're about to hear are real accounts and bone-deep legends from those who survived them, and from some who didn't. Make sure you subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next time the dark calls. Pull up your hood, take a deep breath, because once we start, the cold takes hold, and it's hard to get warm again. Story 1. Thing that wears your skin. I killed my best friend last Tuesday, and I'm telling you this because you need to know what is coming for the rest of us. His name was Marcus Webb. We'd known each other since high school, worked together at the same logistics company in Anchorage for 12 years. Every winter, we'd take a week off and head into the interior for caribou hunting. Just the two of us, a couple of middle-aged guys pretending we were still tough enough to handle the wilderness. This year felt different from the moment we left the highway. The old woman at the gas station in Healy tried to warn us. She was native Alaskan, maybe 70 years old, with eyes that seemed to look straight through you. When Marcus mentioned we were heading up to the Kantishna River area, she went completely still. She told us not to go alone up there. Told us that something had been taking hunters for the past 3 seasons. She used a word I didn't recognize, something in her language that sounded like broken glass scraping against ice. Marcus laughed it off. I should have paid more attention to the fact that the old woman didn't laugh with him. She just watched us leave with an expression I now recognize as pity. We set up camp on the 3rd day, maybe 40 miles from the nearest road, in a valley surrounded by black spruce and frozen tundra. The temperature was holding at 15 below, cold enough to make your teeth ache but manageable if you kept moving. We spent that first afternoon setting up our tent and getting organized. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. That night, I heard something circling our camp. Not walking, circling. The footsteps in the snow were deliberate and measured, moving in a perfect loop around our tent maybe 30 yards out. I woke Marcus and we both listened. The footsteps would stop for long periods, then start again from a different position, always maintaining that same distance. We grabbed our rifles and went outside. Nothing. No tracks in the snow except our own from earlier. No sign that anything had been there at all. Marcus said it was probably a wolf or maybe a bear that hadn't denned up yet, and that we just missed seeing its tracks in the darkness. But I'd grown up in Montana. I knew what wolf tracks looked like, and I knew that animals dawn to move in perfect geometric circles. Animals dawn to stop and start with that kind of unnatural rhythm. We didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started to drift off, I could hear that sound again. Crunch, 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 then silence, then starting again from somewhere else. Always circling, always watching. The next morning, Marcus found the first sign. He'd gone out to check the area in daylight and came back holding something in his gloved hand. It was a piece of fabric, maybe 3 inches square, frozen stiff. The material was canvas, old and weathered, the kind used in hunting parkas from maybe 20 or 30 years ago. But that is not what made my stomach drop. The fabric still had skin attached to it. Human skin, ragged at the edges like it had been torn rather than cut. We should have left right then, packed up our gear and hiked back to the truck. But Marcus had this stubborn streak. Always had. He convinced me it was probably from some old accident. Maybe a trapper who died decades ago and whose remains were just now surfacing as the permafrost shifted. It sounded reasonable in the daylight. Everything sounds reasonable when the sun is up. That afternoon, we split up to scout different areas. We'd done it 100 times before, always staying within radio range. I headed east along a ridgeline while Marcus went west into a small valley. We agreed to meet back at camp before sunset. I got back first, made a fire, melted snow for coffee, settled in to wait. Sunset came and went. The temperature dropped hard as darkness fell, hitting 25 below. I tried Marcus on the radio every 15 minutes. Nothing but static. By 9 o'clock, I was getting seriously worried. By 10, I was terrified. Then I heard footsteps approaching camp. Slow and casual, like someone taking an evening stroll. I grabbed my rifle and pointed my headlamp toward the sound. Marcus walked into the circle of firelight, smiling. But something was wrong. I knew it immediately, even though I couldn't identify what I was seeing. He looked like Marcus. Same height, same build, same gear. He moved like Marcus. Had Marcus His face wore Marcus' wedding ring. But something fundamental was off, like looking at a perfect photograph that was just slightly out of focus. He asked me why I was pointing my rifle at him. His voice was right. The words were right, but there was something hollow underneath, like an echo of an echo. I lowered the gun anyway, because what else could I do? Tell my best friend of 20 years that he seemed wrong somehow? That he didn't feel human anymore? We ate dinner together. He talked about the valley he scouted, described the terrain, mentioned seeing some caribou tracks. Normal conversation, but he never blinked. Not once during the entire meal. I watched him for 30 minutes, and his eyes stayed open and fixed the whole time, only moving when his head moved, like they were locked in position. I pretended everything was fine. Made small talk, laughed at his jokes, acted like I didn't. He noticed that his laugh sounded just a half-second delayed, like he was remembering to do it rather than doing it naturally. When he suggested we turn in for the night, I agreed. We crawled into our sleeping bags on opposite sides of the tent. I didn't sleep. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the thing that looked like Marcus breathing beside me. Except it wasn't really breathing. The sounds were too regular, too perfect. Inhale for exactly 3 seconds. Exhale for exactly 3 seconds. No variation, no natural rhythm. Like something that had watched humans breathe and was trying to replicate it from memory. Around 2 a.m, it spoke. Not to me, but to itself, practicing. It whispered Marcus' name over and over, adjusting the inflection slightly each time, like an actor rehearsing a line. Then it started saying my name. Then my wife's name. Then the names of people from our office. It was learning us, cataloging information, preparing for something. I waited until I heard it move. The sleeping bag rustled as it sat up in the darkness. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it looking at me, studying me with those unblinking eyes. Then it unzipped the tent and crawled outside. The moment it was gone, I grabbed my pack and my rifle and ran. I didn't follow our trail back. I just ran in whatever direction was away, crashing through the forest in the darkness, my headlamp bouncing wildly. Behind me, I heard it calling my name in Marcus' voice. Asking me to wait, asking me to come back. The voice was getting better, more natural, more convinced. It was learning fast. I ran for maybe 2 hours before I couldn't run anymore. I found a dense thicket of spruce trees and crawled into the center, switching off my headlamp, trying to control my breathing. The forest was absolutely silent. Then I heard it moving through the trees nearby, no longer bothering to sound human. Its footsteps were wrong, the gait too wide, the rhythm too fast. Something pretending to be a man but forgetting to maintain the illusion. It passed within 10 feet of my hiding spot. I could see its silhouette against the stars, tall and roughly human-shaped but wrong in ways my brain refused to process. It was wearing Marcus like a suit, but the proportions were off now, stretched and distorted. The head turned too far to the side, rotating past the point where a neck should stop. It was looking for me, sampling the air, learning my scent. Then it spoke in my voice. Perfect and clear, it said my own name exactly the way I would say it. It was showing me what it could do, showing me what it would wear next. I stayed hidden until dawn. When the sun finally rose, I crawled out and started hiking back toward the highway. It took me 2 days. I didn't see the thing again, but I knew it was tracking me. I could find my own footprints in the snow, fresh ones, heading in directions I hadn't to walk. It was getting ahead of me somehow, learning my patterns, my pace, my habits. On the second day, I found our camp. The tent was shredded. Marcus' body was inside, or what was left of it. The skin had been removed in one complete piece, so carefully that his face was still intact, still recognizable, just empty and deflated like a discarded Halloween mask. His eyes were gone. Everything behind the skin was gone. Just the outer shell remained, carefully harvested. I made it to the highway and hitched a ride to Healy. The old woman at the gas station took one look at me and knew. She told me what it was, that thing in the forest. A creature older than her people, as old as stories, something that lived in the deep cold but couldn't survive the temperature without covering itself. It would stalk a person for days, learning everything about them, watching how they moved and talked and existed. Then it would take their skin and wear it back to civilization, living among us until the skin wore out and it needed another. She told me they used to burn the bodies of anyone who went missing in the interior, just to be sure. But people don't do that anymore. People don't believe anymore. So the things keep coming back, wearing faces we recognize, living lives that aren't theirs, waiting among us until they need to shed one skin and find another. I reported Marcus missing. Search and rescue went out, but they'll never find that camp. It knows how to hide now. It's learned, and I've been watching everyone around me ever since, looking for the signs. The too perfect breathing, the unblinking stare, the voice that's just slightly off, because it's still out there, still learning, still hunting. Yesterday I saw Marcus at the grocery store in Anchorage. He waved at me from across the parking lot. He looked perfect. His wife was with him, holding his hand, smiling. And I realized that it's not hunting me anymore. It's already won. It's already living his life, sleeping in his bed, going to his job. And nobody knows except me. I tried to tell his wife. She looked at me like I was insane. Said Marcus had come back from our hunting trip a week ago. Said he'd been quiet and a little strange at first, but was getting better every day. Getting better because it was learning her too. Learning how to be a better Marcus than the real Marcus ever was. I bought a gun yesterday. Not for the thing wearing Marcus. I don't think you can kill something like that. Something that has been hunting in these forests since before we had names for the darkness. I bought it for when I see myself. When I run into my own face looking back at me from somewhere I haven't been. When I shake hands with the thing that's wearing me and realize I've already been replaced. The old woman told me one more thing before I left Healy. She said the worst part isn't to being killed. The worst part is that somewhere deep in the cold, in whatever dark place these things come from, the real you keeps existing. Skinless and aware, watching through eyes you no longer own as the thing wearing your face lives your life better than you ever did. I see Marcus every day now. At work, at the bar, at the gym. He is everywhere I used to be, living my friend. His life, perfecting the disguise. His wife is pregnant. They're happy. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if that is not better. If maybe being replaced by something that tries harder, that pays more attention, that never gets tired or angry or sad, isn't actually an improvement. But then I remember the circling footsteps in the snow. I remember the thing practicing our names in the darkness. And I know that whatever it is, whatever it wants, it is not here to make our lives better. It is here because we have something it needs. Something it can only get by peeling us away and crawling inside what remains. I am telling you this because you need to watch for the signs. The person who comes back from the wilderness acting just slightly wrong. The friend who doesn't blink anymore. The family member whose breathing is too perfect, too regular, too inhuman. They're already here, living among us, wearing faces we trust. And every winter, when people head into the interior alone, more of them come back. Story 2. Walking dark, what happens to your mind when the sun doesn't rise for 65 days straight. I can tell you now, after what I witnessed in Utqiagvik, that darkness does something to the human brain that science hasn't fully explained. And when an entire town starts walking into that darkness while they sleep, all heading to the exact same spot on the frozen ocean, you realize that some things are worse than death. I am a physician assistant stationed at the Samuel Simmons Memorial Hospital, the northernmost medical facility in the United States. Utqiagvik, formerly known as Barrow, sits at the top of Alaska, where the Arctic Ocean meets land and the polar night swallows the world for 2 months every winter. I've worked here for 3 years. I thought I'd seen everything the darkness could throw at people. Depression, anxiety, vitamin D deficiency, the psychological toll of living without sunlight. I was wrong. It started on November 19th, day 14 of the polar night. A woman named Sarah Kalik was brought in by her husband around 4 in the morning. He'd woken up to find her gone, tracked her footprints in the snow for half a mile before finding her standing on the sea ice in negative 47-degree weather, wearing nothing but a nightgown. She was hypothermic, barely conscious, with severe frostbite on her feet and hands. But it was her eyes that disturbed me most. They were open, staring at nothing, moving in rapid patterns like she was watching something I couldn't see. When we warmed her up, when she regained full consciousness, she had no memory of leaving her house. No memory of walking onto the ice. The last thing she remembered was going to bed at 11. 4 hours just gone, erased, with nothing but frozen tissue and a blank stare to show for it. I documented it as a severe sleepwalking episode triggered by the polar night. Prescribed medication, recommended psychiatric evaluation, sent her home with her husband. I thought it was a one-time incident, a tragic anomaly. 2 nights later, we had 4 more cases, all found on the sea ice, all hypothermic, all with no memory, and all of them had been found in roughly the same area, about 1.5 miles northwest of town, in a spot where the ice meets the open ocean. The volunteers who found them said they were all standing in a loose circle, facing the same direction, staring at the horizon where the sun used to be. By November 23rd, we treated 17 people. The pattern was undeniable. They go to sleep in their homes, warm and safe, and wake up hours later on the frozen ocean with frostbite eating through their extremities. Some lost fingers. One man lost both feet, and every single one of them had walked to that same spot, that same circle on the ice, like something was calling them there. The town held an emergency meeting. People were terrified, locking their bedroom doors, tying themselves to their beds, setting alarms every hour. But it didn't stop. The walking continued, and it was spreading. Not just adults now, children, teenagers, even people who claimed they never sleepwalked in their lives were waking up on the ice with blackened toes and no memory of how they got there. I started staying awake, monitoring the streets from the hospital windows. On November 25th, I watched it happen in real time. Around 2 a.m, I saw them emerge from their houses. Dozens of people, walking in their pajamas and nightgowns, barefoot or in slippers, moving through the -50-degree darkness like they were taking a casual stroll. They walked in silence, in unison, all heading northwest toward the ocean. I grabbed my parka and followed, keeping my distance. The cold was brutal, the kind that makes your lungs hurt with every breath, that freezes the moisture in your eyes. But these people, these sleepwalkers, they moved through it like it was nothing. No shivering, no hesitation, just steady, purposeful walking. They reached the ice and kept going, out onto the frozen ocean, away from the lights of town, into the absolute darkness of the polar night. I followed until I could barely see them, until they were just shapes in the black, and then I stopped. Because I could hear something. Not wind, not ice cracking, something else. A sound like breathing, but massive, like the ocean itself was inhaling and exhaling beneath the frozen surface. The sleepwalkers formed their circle, maybe 50 of them now, all facing the same direction. And they just stood there, waiting. For what? I couldn't imagine. I watched for 20 minutes, my body screaming at me to get back to warmth, before I finally retreated. When the search and rescue teams went out an hour later, they found all 50 people exactly where I left them, hypothermic, frostbitten, and completely unaware of where they were or how they gotten there. The CDC got involved. Researchers flew up from Anchorage. They tested our water, our food, checked for environmental toxins, infectious agents, anything that might explain a mass sleepwalking event. They found nothing. Our blood work was normal. Our brain scans showed no abnormalities. According to every medical test available, we were perfectly healthy people who just happened to be walking into deadly cold while unconscious. But I knew there was more to it. I heard that breathing. I'd seen the way they moved, the synchronization, the purpose. This wasn't a medical condition. This was something else. On November 28th, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I drove out to the ice during the day, or what passes for day during polar night, just a few hours of twilight around noon. I wanted to see that spot, wanted to understand what was drawing people there. I parked my snowmobile at the edge of the formation and walked the rest of the way. The ice was smooth, wind-scoured, with pressure ridges rising up like frozen waves. I found their circle easily, could see where dozens of feet had stood, where bodies had fallen when hypothermia took them. And in the center of the circle, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A hole in the ice, not natural, perfectly round, about 6 feet across, filled with dark water that should have frozen solid in these temperatures but hadn't. And the water was moving, not from current, not from wind. It was rippling from below, like something was rising toward the surface. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering. As I retreated, I saw them. Shapes in the water, large shapes, moving in patterns that suggested intelligence, purpose. And I realized what the sleepwalkers had been watching, what they'd been walking toward. Something was in the ocean beneath Utqiagvik. Something that had been waiting in the deep cold, waiting for the sun to disappear, waiting for the darkness to become absolute. I reported what I found. The authorities cordoned off the area, posted guards, told people to stay away from the ice. But it didn't matter. That night, the 30th of November, almost 100 people walked. The guards tried to stop them, physically restrained them, but the sleepwalkers fought back with inhuman strength. 3 guards ended up hospitalized. The walkers made it to their circle. I was part of the rescue team that went out after them. We found 96 people standing around that hole in the ice, staring down into the dark water. And this time, they were singing. Not words, just a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to resonate through the ice itself, through our bodies, through our bones. And the water in the hole was glowing, a faint, blue-green bioluminescence that pulsed in time with their song. When we tried to move them, to break them out of their trance, they turned on us. Not violently, they just reached out, touched us, and I felt it. The cold, not from the air, from inside, a freezing sensation that started where their hands made contact and spread through my body like ice water in my veins. I jerked away, but I could see it affecting the others. Rescue workers dropping to their knees, their eyes going distant, their mouths starting to form that same wordless song. I ran, got back to my snowmobile and drove straight to the hospital. I locked myself in my office and started writing everything down, documenting what I seen, what I felt. Because I knew what was happening now. The thing in the water, whatever it was spreading. Not through disease, through touch, through contact. Once it got into you, once you felt that cold, you became part of it. Part of the walking, part of the waiting. Over the next week, the number of walkers tripled. The National Guard was called in. They evacuated the town. Mandatory relocation to Fairbanks until the phenomenon could be understood and controlled. But I know it won. Stop. I know because I can still feel it inside me. That cold, that pull, every time I fall asleep, I dream of the ice, of the hole, of the shapes moving beneath the surface, ancient and patient and hungry. They found the rescue workers I left behind. All of them were standing in that circle, singing that song, their body temperatures dropping to levels incompatible with life but still somehow alive. Still conscious, still waiting for something to emerge from the water. I am writing this from a hotel in Fairbanks. It's been 2 weeks since I left Utqiagvik. The sun rises here, sets here, normal patterns of day and night. But I am still cold, so cold. And last night, I woke up standing at my window, staring north, toward the Arctic Ocean, toward that hole in the ice. I had no memory of getting out of bed, no memory of crossing the room. The polar night in Utqiagvik will last another month, 65 days of darkness. And during that time, whatever is in the water has free rein. No sunlight to drive it back. No warmth to diminish its call. And I think it's not just calling to Utqiagvik anymore. I think it's expanding its reach, touching anyone who got too close, who felt that cold, who heard that song. There are others in Fairbanks now. Evacuees from the town. I see them sometimes, standing outside at night, facing north, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. They dawn, they redoing it. They think they reawake, going about their lives. But I can see it in their eyes. That distant look, that waiting. The CDC is calling it a mass psychogenic illness. Shared delusion triggered by environmental stress and prolonged darkness. They planning to send people back to Utqiagvik after the sun returns, after the polar night ends. They think sunlight will cure whatever this is. But I know better. I know because I can feel it calling to me right now. Even here, even hundreds of miles south. The cold is in my bones. The song is in my head. And every night, I walk a little further from my hotel before I wake up. A little closer to the highway. A little closer to the road that leads north. I don't think I have much time left. Soon, I'll walk too far, and I won. Wake up. I'll just keep walking through Fairbanks, through the wilderness, across the frozen landscape, until I reach that hole in the ice. Until I join the others in their circle, singing their song, waiting for whatever lies beneath to finally surface. If you live in Alaska, if you live anywhere the polar night reaches, be careful. Lock your doors. Tie yourself down. Because when the sun disappears and the darkness becomes absolute, something wakes up beneath the ice. Something old, something hungry. And it is calling us all home to the cold. I can hear it now. even in daylight. The breathing, the song. I'm so cold. And I think tonight, I'm finally going to answer. Story 3. Second line, there are 2 pipelines at Prudhoe Bay. Everyone knows about one. Nobody talks about the other. I worked the North Slope for 6 years, and I am telling you this now because I can, to keep it inside anymore. Because 3 weeks ago, I saw my own face looking back at me from inside that phantom pipeline. And whatever is running through those ghost pipes, it is anthology. My name is Jake Morrison. I am a pipeline inspector for one of the big oil companies, the kind that pays well enough to make you forget you, reworking in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. -60 in winter, months of darkness, nothing but flat tundra and the constant howl of Arctic wind. Most guys do 2-week rotations and spend their off time trying to remember what warmth feels like. I did month-long shifts because the isolation never bothered me. I actually preferred it until I saw the second line. It happened in January, during the dead of winter when the sun doesn't rise and your world becomes headlamps and floodlights in darkness that presses against you like something physical. I was doing a routine inspection, walking the elevated sections, checking welds and supports, the usual drill. The real Trans-Alaska Pipeline runs for 800 miles, but my section was just a 12-mile stretch near Prudhoe Bay. I walked it hundreds of times. I knew every support beam, every access point, every inch of that 48-inch steel tube. That is why I noticed when there were 2 of them. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The Arctic does things to your vision. Ice crystals in the air create halos around lights. Temperature inversions cause mirages. You learn to not trust what you see. But this wasn't a mirage. About 30 feet to the south of the real pipeline, running perfectly parallel, was another pipe. Shimmering, translucent, like heat waves rising off summer asphalt, except we were in 60 below cold. It was the same size, same elevation, same everything. A perfect ghost of the real thing. I stopped walking and stared at it. The phantom pipeline wavered in and out of focus, sometimes sharp enough to see individual welds, sometimes fading to almost nothing. And beneath the wind, I heard something else. A deep, rhythmic thrumming. Like massive machinery running somewhere underground. Like something far larger than our pipeline, processing something far heavier than crude oil. I radioed back to base, asked if anyone else was seeing anomalies. The response was static and confusion. They told me to come in, said I'd been out too long, that the cold was getting to me. Standard protocol when someone starts reporting things that shouldn't exist. But I knew what I was seeing. I knew it was real. I took a step toward the phantom pipeline. The thrumming grew louder, and under it, I heard something that made my blood freeze colder than the Arctic air ever could. Screaming, faint, distant, barely audible over the machinery sounds, but unmistakable. Human voices, dozens of them, maybe more, all screaming in perfect unison. Not screams of pain or fear, screams of warning, like they were trying to tell me something, like they were trying to stop me from getting closer. I ran back to base and didn't say another word about it. Not that night, not the next day. I told myself it was stress, isolation, the darkness playing tricks. I threw myself into work, double-checked every reading, stayed busy enough to not think about what I'd seen. But the phantom pipeline didn't go away. Other workers started mentioning it. Casual comments at first. Weird shimmer near section 12. Thought I saw a second line yesterday. Anyone else notice that? Management shut down the talk fast, threatened anyone who kept discussing it. Hallucinations brought on by isolation, they said. Perfectly normal. But I saw the fear in their eyes. They knew. They'd always known. I started asking the old-timers, the guys who'd been working the slope since the pipeline was built in the 70s. Most wouldn't talk. But one guy, a maintenance worker named Carl who was 3 weeks from retirement, pulled me aside after a shift. He told me the phantom pipeline had been there from the beginning. Not built, just there, appearing shortly after the real line started pumping oil. At first, it was barely visible, just a shimmer in the distance. But over the years, it got stronger, more solid, more real, and the sounds got louder. That deep thrumming machinery, those screams. Carl said 7 workers had disappeared over the decades. Not accidents, not weather, just gone, vanished during their shifts, last seen near the phantom pipeline. The company covered it up, called them walkaway cases, paid off families. But Carl knew better. He'd seen the look on their faces before they disappeared. That distant stare, that pull towards something they couldn't explain. He told me to never approach it, never listen to the sounds, never try to understand what it was or where it came from. Some things, he said, aren't meant for us to know. Some things exist in spaces between what we can see and what we can see, and getting too close means getting pulled in. I should have listened, but 3 days later, during a whiteout storm, I found myself walking toward the phantom pipeline. Do you remember deciding to go? One moment I was checking pressure readings. The next I was trudging through waist-deep snow, my headlamp barely penetrating the white void, following that thrumming sound like a compass needle. The phantom pipeline solidified as I got closer. It wasn't transparent anymore. It was real, physical, made of the same weathered steel as our line. But it was wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The proportions were slightly off. The welds looked organic, grown rather than forged. And it was warm. In -50 temperature, the metal radiated heat that I could feel through my gloves. The thrumming was deafening now, so loud it shook my chest and made my teeth ache. And the screams were clear, not distant, right there, inside the pipe, traveling through whatever was flowing in there. I pressed my ear against the warm metal, and I heard them. Individual voices, speaking names, speaking dates, speaking warnings. One voice said my name. I jerked back, heart hammering, but the voice continued, muffled but distinct, coming from inside the pipe. It was my voice, speaking words I never said, describing events that hadn't happened yet, telling me to run, telling me it was already too late, telling me that I had been marked the moment I first saw the phantom pipeline, and that everything since then had been leading to this moment. I found an access panel. It shouldn't have been there. Our pipeline doesn't have panels in that section. But this one did, and it was unlocked, and before I could stop myself, I was opening it. The interior glowed with a dull red light. The pipe wasn't carrying oil. It was carrying something else, something thick and viscous that moved against the flow of physics, crawling along the walls rather than being pumped through. And in that substance, I saw shapes, human shapes, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, suspended in the flow, slowly moving through the pipe. Some were decomposed. Some looked fresh. All of them had their mouths open in silent screams. One of them had my face. Not similar, not a relative. My exact face, my exact body, wearing the same clothes I was wearing, frozen in the same expression of horror I could feel on my own face. And as I watched, its eyes moved, focused on me, recognized me. The thing inside the pipe raised one hand and pressed it against the interior wall, directly across from where I stood. I lifted my own hand without meaning to, matching its gesture. Our palms aligned through 6 inches of steel, and I felt something flow between us. Information, memory, understanding. The phantom pipeline isn't carrying oil. It is carrying possibilities. All the versions of us that didn't happen. All the choices we didn't make. All the lives we didn't live. It runs parallel to our world, processing what we left behind. And sometimes it needs to balance itself. Sometimes it needs to swap what is for what could have been. The thing with my face wasn't a corpse. It was me, a version of me who made different choices, lived a different life, died a different death. And now it wanted out. It wanted to swap places. It wanted to be the real one while I flowed through that phantom pipe, slowly decomposing in the flow of unlived possibilities. I slammed the panel shut and ran. Behind me, I heard metal groaning, heard the pipeline surge with new pressure, heard my own voice screaming from inside it, begging me to let it out, promising it would be better, it would live my life better than I ever could. I made it back to base and put in for immediate evacuation. Medical emergency, mental health crisis, whatever would get me off the slope fastest. They flew me out the next morning, and I never went back. But here is the thing. Here is why I can't sleep anymore. I see the phantom pipeline everywhere now. Not just in Alaska, in Texas, in Oklahoma, in Pennsylvania, shimmering next to every oil pipeline, every gas line, every major conduit carrying resources across the country. They were all there, running parallel, processing what we left behind. And they were all getting more solid, more real. Last week, I saw one next to a highway. Not a pipeline, a phantom road, shimmering in the heat, carrying ghost traffic. Cars driven by versions of people who taken different routes, made different turns, avoided accidents they didn't, they avoided. And one of those cars was mine. And one of those drivers had my face. I think we re-leaking our reality, our choices, the lives we actually living. We re-leaking into something else. And that something else is building infrastructure to collect us, to process us, to give all our unlived possibilities somewhere to go. And I think it's almost ready to open, to merge, to let all those phantom versions cross over and swap places with us. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know if it can be stopped. But I know this. If you ever see a second pipeline running parallel to the real one, to approach it. To listen to the machinery. To open any panels. Because whatever you find inside will have your face. And it will want to trade places. And part of you, the part that wonders what life would be like if you made different choices, will want to let it. The phantom pipeline at Prudhoe Bay is still there. Still thrumming. Still carrying all those possibilities. And my face is still flowing through it, suspended in that red fluid, slowly making its way south, following the line, getting closer to civilization, getting closer to places where more people can see it, can open it, can let it out. I'm leaving the country, getting as far from pipelines as I can. But I know it won't matter, because there is phantom infrastructure everywhere now. Phantom roads, phantom power lines, phantom networks carrying all the versions of ourselves we didn't become. And they were all converging, all leading to the same place, all preparing for the moment when what could have been finally swaps places with what is. When that happens, I don't know which version of me will be left standing. The one writing this, or the one flowing through that phantom pipe, wearing my face, living my unlived life. If you, rereading this, check your mirrors, check them carefully, because the person looking back might not be you. It might be the version of you that made different choices. The one that has been flowing through phantom pipes, waiting for the chance to swap places. The one that is almost ready to step through. The phantom pipeline remembers everyone who has seen it, and it never stops flowing. Story 4. Bore writer there, as a video on my phone that I can delete. Every time I try, it reappears, the same 30-second clip showing something riding the bore tide in turn again arm that shouldn't exist. And every time I watch it, I see myself a little clearer in the water behind that thing, getting closer to the wave, getting closer to taking my turn on the surf. I am a nature photographer based out of Anchorage. For the past 6 years, I've been documenting Alaska, its wildlife and natural phenomena for magazines, documentaries, anyone who pay. The bore tide in turn again arm is one of those bucket list shots. Twice a day, when conditions are right, a wall of water rushes up the inlet, sometimes reaching 6 feet high, traveling at 15 miles per hour. It's one of the largest tidal bores in the world, and it is spectacular. I photographed it a dozen times before August 15th. Always from the shore, always from a safe distance. But that day, I wanted something different. I wanted to be in the water to capture the wave from the perspective of something caught in its path. So I bought a waterproof housing for my camera, rented a dry suit, and drove down to the mudflats near Girdwood at dawn. The locals at the bait shop warned me. An older guy named Dale, probably 70, with skin like old leather and eyes that had seen too much ocean. He told me to stay out of the water during bore tide. Said it wasn't just the wave that was dangerous. Said there was something that rode it, something that had been riding it for 40 years. And anyone who got too close ended up in the water permanently. I smiled, thanked him for the concern, and headed out anyway. Urban legends are part of Alaska's charm. Every natural phenomenon has a ghost story attached. I didn't believe in the bore rider any more than I believed in Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. The tide was due at 6:47 in the morning. I positioned myself in shallow water about 50 yards from the main channel, camera ready, dry suit keeping me warm against the 40-degree water. The inlet was calm, almost glassy, with mountains rising on both sides and low clouds catching the early light. Perfect conditions. I heard the bore before I saw it, a rumble like distant thunder, growing louder. Then I saw the wave forming in the channel, a moving wall of brown water pushing upstream against the natural flow. It was beautiful and terrifying, the raw power of the ocean compressed into a single surge. I started shooting, my camera capturing frame after frame as the wave approached. Through my viewfinder, I tracked the bore, its leading edge, watching it curl and break, And that is when I saw him. A figure standing on the wave. Not surfing, standing. Perfectly balanced on water that should have been impossible to ride. Moving with the bore like he was part of it. I stopped shooting, lowered my camera, stared with my naked eyes to make sure I wasn't seeing things. He was still there. A man, or something shaped like a man, wearing what looked like old fishing gear. Even from a distance, I could see something was wrong with him. His movements were too fluid, too smooth, and his skin, what I could see of it, had a gray-green color that matched the water. The boar passed within 30 feet of me, close enough that I could see his face. Waterlogged, bloated, eyes that were solid black, no whites, no iris, just darkness that seemed to pull in light. And he was looking at me, turned his head as he rode past, locked those black eyes on mine, and smiled. His teeth were raw, too many of them, sharp, like something had replaced his human mouth with something designed for tearing. Then he was gone, riding the wave upstream, disappearing around a bend in the inlet. I stood there in the water, shaking, telling myself I hallucinated. Low light, adrenaline, the mind playing tricks, but when I checked my camera, when I reviewed the shots I'd taken, he was there in every frame. Clear, undeniable, something riding the boar tide that shouldn't exist. I drove back to Anchorage, uploaded the photos to my computer, started researching. The boar rider legend went back decades. The most common version claimed he was a fisherman named Robert Marsh who drowned in Turnagain Arm in 1982. His boat capsized during a boar tide. They never found his body. And starting about a month after his death, people began reporting a figure riding the waves. Always alone, always watching the shore. And over the years, fishermen and tourists who got too close to the boar tide started disappearing. 7 documented cases since 1982. People who were seen near the water during boar tide and never seen again. No bodies recovered. No evidence of what happened to them. Just gone, swallowed by the inlet, by the waves, by something that wouldn't let them go. I contacted Dale, the old man from the bait shop. Drove back down to Girdwood to show him my photos. He went pale when he saw them, actually stepped back from my computer like the images might reach out and grab him. He told me about his brother, Tommy, who had been one of the early victims. 1985. Tommy was fishing near the mudflats when the boar came through. Dale watched from shore as his brother suddenly waded deeper into the water, like something was calling him. The wave hit, Tommy disappeared. They searched for 2 weeks and found nothing. But Dale kept seeing him. In photographs of the boar tide taken by tourists, by researchers, by anyone who captured the wave. In the background, in the water, Tommy, his face would appear. Bloated, changed, part of something that wasn't quite human anymore. And always, there was the rider, standing on the wave, adding another victim to his collection. Dale grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for his age. He told me I needed to stay away from the inlet. Said the rider had seen me now, marked me, and the only way to break the connection was to never go back. Never photograph a boar again. Never even think about it too hard. I promised him I wouldn't. Drove home, deleted the photos from my computer, formatted my camera, its memory card. But the video remained on my phone. I don't remember taking a video. I only shot stills that morning. But there it was, 30 seconds of footage showing the rider in perfect detail, showing him turn toward the camera, showing him smile with those terrible teeth. And in the background, barely visible in the murky water, I could see them. Faces, dozens of faces beneath the surface, mouths open in silent screams, hands reaching up toward the light. The rider, his collection, everyone he'd taken over 40 years, trapped in the inlet, forced to follow the boar tide twice a day, every day, for eternity. I tried to delete the video. It came back. Tried to factory reset my phone. The video was there when the phone restarted, the only file that survived the wipe. I threw the phone in a drawer, bought a new one. A week later, the video appeared on the new phone. Same file, same timestamp, like it was following me, making sure I didn't forget. That is when the dream started. Every night, I'm in the water at Turnagain Arm. The boar is coming. I can hear it, that rumbling thunder growing louder. And I am walking deeper, wading out toward the channel, unable to stop myself. The wave hits, the cold water closes over my head, and I see him standing above me on the crest of the boar, reaching down, offering his hand. In the dreams, I can see what he is offering. A place on the wave. A chance to ride forever. To be part of the tide. Part of the inlet. Part of something ancient and hungry that predates human understanding. All I have to do is take his hand. All I have to do is let the water into my lungs and accept what I'm becoming. I wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat that smells like salt water. And my skin feels wrong. Too cold, too smooth, like it is starting to change. Starting to adapt to a life underwater. 3 weeks after I photographed the Boar Rider, I found myself driving to Turnagain Arm. I done. Do you remember deciding to go? I done. Do you remember getting in my car? I just suddenly became aware that I was on the Seward Highway, heading south, with the inlet stretched out beside me. And I could feel it. The pull, like something had hooked into my chest and was reeling me in. I stopped at a pullout, forced myself to turn around, drove back to Anchorage. But the pull got stronger every day. I'd be at home, editing photos, and suddenly I'd be standing at my door with my keys in my hand, ready to drive south. I'd be asleep, and I'd wake up in my car in the driveway, engine running, facing the direction of the inlet. Dale called me last week, said he'd seen my face in a tourist's photo of the Boar Tide. Not on shore, in the water, just my face, barely visible beneath the surface, mouth open, eyes black. He said I was already part of it, already joining the collection, and it was only a matter of time before my body caught up with what my soul had become. I am watching the tide charts obsessively now. To help it, I know when the next Boar Tide is coming, down to the minute. September 3rd, 6:32 in the morning. And I know I'm going to be there. Not because I want to be, because I have to be. Because the rider is waiting for me. Has been waiting since that morning in August when I got too close. When I looked into his eyes and saw the abyss looking back. Last night, I watched the video again. The rider is closer to the camera than he was before. I know that. It's impossible. I know the footage can change, but he is closer, and the faces in the water behind him are clearer now. I can make out features, expressions, identities. I can see Tommy, Dale, his brother, his face frozen in an eternal scream. I can see all of them, everyone the rider has claimed. And at the very back, just emerging from the darkness, I can see myself. My face, my expression, already there, already waiting, already part of the collection even though my body is still here, still breathing, still pretending I have a choice. I am writing this as a warning. If you photograph the Boar Tide in Turnagain Arm, if you see a figure riding the wave, don't to look at his face. Don't let him see you. Delete your photos immediately. Destroy your camera if you have to. Because once he marks you, once he decides you, next, there's no escape. The inlet owns you, the water owns you, and eventually, inevitably, you wade out into the mudflats when the boar is coming, and you let that wall of water take you under. The tide is in 4 hours. I can feel it coming, the way you feel a storm in your bones. My skin is cold. My fingers are starting to web. When I breathe, I can taste salt water even though I'm miles from the ocean. And I can hear him calling, not with words, with the sound of waves, with the rumble of the Boar Tide, with the promise of riding forever, of becoming part of something vast and terrible and eternal. I am going to drive to Turnagain Arm now. I am going to wade into the water. I am going to wait for the wave. And when the rider offers his hand, when he welcomes me to his collection, I am going to take it. Not because I want to, because I don't have a choice anymore. If you see a new face in the water next time you photograph the Boar Tide, if you see someone young with a camera, remember this story. Remember that the inlet takes what it wants, and the Boar Rider is always looking for company. The water is calling me home, and I am so tired of fighting it. I'm so cold now, so ready to ride. Story 5. Storm that knew our names. The snow formed hands against my window last night. Perfect human hands, pressed flat against the glass from the outside, fingers splayed like someone begging to get in. And I know it is starting again, 53 years later, because this time it whispered my daughter's name. I need to tell you about 1972, about the blizzard that shouldn't have been possible, about the storm that learned to think. My name is Robert Chen, and I'm one of 7 people who survived what happened in Coldbrook, Alaska, a town that doesn't to exist anymore. A town that was erased so thoroughly that if you search for it online, you'll find nothing. No records, no maps, no acknowledgement it was ever there. The government made sure of that. But they can erase my memory. They can make me forget the sound of the wind calling my mother. This name. Coldbrook was a village of maybe 200 people, tucked into a valley 60 miles from anywhere that mattered. My father worked the mines. My mother ran the general store. We had a school, a church, and one road in and out that got snowed over more often than it stayed clear. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where you left your doors unlocked, where life moved slow and predictable. The blizzard hit on March 3rd. The forecast had called for moderate snow, nothing unusual for early March in Alaska. But when it arrived, it came wrong. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 20 minutes. The wind went from calm to hurricane force with no buildup. And the snow, Christ, the snow fell so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I was 14 years old, home from school, watching through our living room window as the world disappeared into white. My father had been at the mine, my mother at the store. They were supposed to be home by 4. By 5, visibility was 0. By 6, the power went out. By 7, I understood they weren't coming home. I sat in the dark, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind. And that is when I first heard it speak. Not words, exactly. More like the wind was forming sounds that almost resembled speech, testing syllables, learning how to shape human language. It reminded me of a baby babbling, except this baby had the voice of a hurricane and it was practicing with sounds it had stolen from the people of Coldbrook. Around midnight, it said my name, Robert, clear as day. My name carried on the wind, repeated over and over, getting the pronunciation right, learning the rhythm of it. Robert, 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 each repetition more perfect than the last. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound penetrated everything. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from everywhere at once, vibrating through the walls, the floor, the air itself. Then it started calling for my mother. Margaret, Margaret Chen, come to the window. Margaret, let me in. Margaret. The voice was seductive, almost kind, like a friend calling from outside. Like someone who genuinely wanted to see her, to talk to her. And I realized with sick certainty that if my mother had been home, if she'd been alone in the dark listening to that voice, she might have opened the door. The blizzard continued for 3 days straight. 72 hours of wind and snow and those terrible voices, learning our names, calling to us, begging to be let in. I stayed away from the windows because I knew something was wrong with them. I could hear scratching on the glass, tapping, patterns being drawn in the frost. When the storm finally broke on the 4th day, I opened my front door to a world transformed. The snow had drifted to the roof lines. Cars were completely buried, and the shapes, the shapes the snow had formed were impossible. Every house in Coldbrook was surrounded by snowdrifts that looked like grasping hands. Dozens of them, all reaching toward windows and doors, fingers curled like they'd been trying to dig through. Some were small, child-sized. Others were massive, 8 or 9 feet tall. All of them perfectly formed, too detailed to be natural, too deliberate to be coincidence. I climbed through a window and waded through snow up to my chest, heading toward town. The silence after the storm was worse than the noise during it. Complete absence of sound, like the world was holding its breath. I called out for my parents, for anyone, and my voice was swallowed by the white emptiness. I found the first body near the church. Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor, frozen in the snow with her front door wide open behind her. Her face was peaceful, almost smiling, and her hand was outstretched like she'd been reaching for something. Like she'd heard her name called and had come outside to greet whoever was calling. Like she'd trusted the voice in the storm. I found 17 more people the same way, scattered throughout Coldbrook, frozen in the snow, all with that same peaceful expression, all with their doors standing open, all reaching toward something that wasn't there anymore. My parents were at the general store. They barricaded themselves inside when the storm hit, along with 6 other people. Smart, safe, except the voices had called to them for 3 days straight, wearing them down, learning their fears and desires, promising warmth and safety if they'd just come outside. On the 3rd night, my father had broken. He opened the door and walked out into the blizzard, and my mother had followed, trying to bring him back. Neither had made it more than 10 feet. I found them holding each other in the snow, frozen together, their faces turned toward each other in their last moment. That is the only mercy I can find in any of this. They didn't die alone. The 7 of us who survived had one thing in common. We all stayed away from the windows. We all ignored the voices, no matter how convincing they became, no matter whose voices they mimicked. We understood, instinctively or through dumb luck, that the storm was intelligent and malicious and hunting us specifically. The rescue teams arrived 5 days after the storm ended. They found a mass casualty event they couldn't explain. 143 people dead from exposure, all within their own town, all with access to shelter and heat. The official report called it mass hysteria brought on by isolation and extreme weather. A shared delusion that caused people to abandon safety. But the rescuers saw those hand-shaped drifts. They saw the patterns scratched into every window. They heard our stories about the voices, about the storm that learned to speak. And 3 weeks later, the government relocated everyone who survived, scattered us across the country, and erased Coldbrook from existence. They told us never to speak about it, threatened us with consequences if we did, made us sign documents that I'm sure violated every constitutional right we had. But they were terrified, and that fear was contagious, because they knew what we knew, that the blizzard of 1972 wasn't natural, that it had been something else wearing the shape of a storm, something that had learned to mimic human speech in human forms, something that had targeted specific families for reasons we couldn't understand. I spent 50 years trying to forget. I moved to California, to warmth and sun and a place where snow was something you drove hours to see. I built a life, had a daughter, convinced myself it had been a one-time thing, an anomaly, something that couldn't happen again. But it is happening again. 3 weeks ago, it snowed in Los Angeles. First time in decades, just a dusting, nothing serious. But I saw the patterns in it. Those same deliberate shapes, those same reaching hands, smaller this time but unmistakably the same. And in the middle of the night, I heard the wind calling my name. Robert Chen, do you remember me? Robert? I've been waiting. I've been learning. I know so much more now. My daughter heard it too. She came to my room, terrified, saying something was calling her name from outside, saying it sounded like her dead grandmother, like my mother, using the voice I described to her 1,000 times in stories about my childhood. The voice she never actually heard because my mother died years before she was born. The storm knows things it shouldn't, It's been watching us, following the survivors. And now it is back, stronger and smarter and more patient than before. Because it didn't just learn our names in 1972. It learned our bloodlines, our families, our connections, and it is calling our children now. They contacted the other survivors. 3 are dead, natural causes over the years. 2 to talk to me, hung up the moment I mentioned Coldbrook. 1 confirmed she is experiencing the same thing. Voices in the snow, patterns on windows. Her son, his name being whispered by something that sounds exactly like her long-dead husband. We being hunted by a storm that never really ended. By something that used the blizzard of 1972 as a learning experience, a way to understand us better, to find our weaknesses. And now it is ready to finish what it started. Last night, the temperature in my bedroom dropped to freezing while the thermostat read 75. Frost spread across my window from the inside, forming words I recognized. Names, the names of everyone who died in Coldbrook, written in ice crystals, a roll call of the dead. And at the bottom, in letters twice as large as the others, my name. My daughter, its name. Still living, still available, still targets. The forecast calls for snow tonight. Unseasonable, unprecedented, impossible snow in the middle of summer in Los Angeles. But it's coming anyway because weather doesn't matter anymore. The storm goes where it wants, does what it wants, and what it wants is to finish collecting the families it marked 53 years ago. I am writing this as a warning. If you survived something that shouldn't have been possible, something that seemed too intelligent to be natural, it is not over. If you heard voices in a storm that knew your name, knew your family, knew exactly how to make you open your door, it is still out there. Still learning, still hunting. And if it snows where snow shouldn't fall, if you hear your name whispered on an impossible wind, if you see hand-shaped drifts pressing against your windows, don't T. Listen. Don. To look. Don. To convince yourself it is coincidence or imagination or weather being weird. It is the storm. And it remembers you. The snow is starting to fall outside my window right now. Big, heavy flakes that shouldn't exist in 70-degree weather. And I can hear it already. That familiar voice riding the wind, calling my daughter this name, promising her that her grandmother's outside, waiting to meet her, promising warmth and safety and love. My daughter's asking why I want to let her look out the window. Why I covered every pane of glass in the house with blankets. Why I'm crying while I write this. Because I know how this ends. I've always known. The storm doesn't stop. It doesn't give up. It just waits until you weak enough, scared enough, desperate enough to believe the lies it tells. And eventually, everyone opens the door. Everyone goes outside to see what is calling their name. Even me. Story 6. Frozen eyes. I never believed in curses until I found myself standing in a cave on Kodiak Island, staring at a bear that had been dead for 30 years but still looked like it was screaming. Let me back up. My name is David, and in the spring of 2025, I took a contract job as a wildlife photographer for a nature documentary. The assignment seemed straightforward enough. Head to Kodiak Island in Alaska, document the grizzly population, get some footage of them emerging from winter dens. Easy money. I had done similar work in Yellowstone and the Rockies. Bears were bears. I knew how to keep my distance and get the shots I needed. What I didn't know was that I was being sent to document something that should have stayed buried. The helicopter dropped me off at a research station on the northern coast. The place was barely more than a glorified cabin with satellite internet and a diesel generator that coughed like a dying man. My contact was a biologist named Sarah Chen, mid-50s, with the kind of weathered face you get from spending decades in the elements. She shook my hand without smiling. You know about 1995? She asked before I even set my bags down. I told her I didn't. She pulled out a faded folder from a filing cabinet that looked older than I was. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy, but clear enough to see what they showed. Bears, dozens of them, all frozen in their dens. And their eyes, God, their eyes, silent spring, we called it, Sarah said, her voice flat. Every bear on the northern half of the island, 473 animals. They went into hibernation in the fall of '94 like they always did. But come spring of '95, not a single one came out. When the teams went into the dens, they found them like this. I looked closer at the photos. The bears weren't just dead. They were locked in positions of absolute terror. Mouths open, claws extended, bodies twisted like they had tried to claw their way through solid rock. And their eyes, frozen open, reflected something in the camera flash that looked almost like recognition. Autopsies showed nothing wrong, Sarah continued. No disease, no poison, no trauma. Healthy bears, perfect for hibernation, just froze solid in their sleep with their eyes open. Every single one of them. I asked the obvious question. What killed them? Sarah closed the folder. That is what you were here to find out. Or at least, that is what your employer thinks. 3 weeks ago, we started finding new dens. Bears that denned this past winter. And they were not coming out either. The first den was a 6-mile hike from the research station, deep into the spruce forest that covers the island like a dark green blanket. Sarah and I set out at dawn, the air cold enough to burn my lungs with each breath. She carried a rifle. I carried my camera equipment and a growing sense that I had signed up for something far outside my job description. We didn't talk much during the hike. The forest was too quiet for conversation. That was the first thing I noticed. No birds, no insects, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just our footsteps crunching through old snow and the whisper of wind through the trees. The den was in a hillside, a natural cavity beneath the roots of a massive spruce that had probably been growing since before Alaska was a state. Sarah stopped about 20 feet away and shouldered her rifle, scanning the area. You first, she said. I need to watch our backs. I wanted to ask what she was watching for, but something in her expression told me I didn't want to know. I approached the den opening slowly, my camera already recording. The entrance was dark, barely wider than my shoulders. I clicked on my headlamp and crouched down. The smell hit me before I saw anything. Not decay, something else, something chemical and wrong, like burnt plastic mixed with ozone. I covered my nose and mouth with my jacket sleeve and crawled forward. The den opened into a larger chamber, maybe 8 feet across. And there, in the center, was the bear. It was a female, probably 600 pounds, curled in the classic hibernation position. But she wasn't sleeping. She was frozen solid, her fur rimmed with ice crystals that sparkled in my headlamp beam. And her eyes were open, wide open, staring directly at the den entrance. Directly at me. I have photographed dead animals before. It is part of the job. But this was different. The bear's expression was unmistakable. Pure, primal terror. Whatever she had seen or felt in her final moments had been so horrifying that it had locked her face into a permanent scream. I forced myself to take photos, to document, to do my job, but my hands were shaking, and not from the cold. That's when I noticed the walls. The dirt and rock around the bear were covered in scratch marks. Deep gouges where she had torn at the earth with her claws. She had tried to dig her way out, or dig her way deeper in. I couldn't tell which, but the marks went all around the chamber, hundreds of them, frantic and wild. And beneath those marks, barely visible in the beam of my headlamp, were symbols. Not scratches, symbols, carved into the rock with precision that no animal could achieve. Geometric patterns, spirals, lines that intersected at impossible angles. They covered every surface of the den, hidden beneath the bear's desperate claw marks like a layer of ancient graffiti. I was so focused on the symbols that I almost didn't hear it. A sound, soft at first, like breathing, but not quite, more like the memory of breathing. The echo of lungs that had stopped working long ago. I spun around, my headlamp cutting through the darkness. Nothing, just the den entrance behind me. Sarah, a silhouette visible in the distance. But the sound continued, and then I realized it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from the bear. I know how insane that sounds. The bear was frozen solid, dead for months. But I could hear it, a wet, rattling breath that seemed to come from deep in its chest. And as I watched, unable to move, unable to think, one of those frozen eyes rotated in its socket and focused on me. I don't remember crawling out of the den. I don't remember the hike back to the research station. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in the cabin, Sarah pouring me something that smelled like kerosene and tasted worse. "You saw something?" she said. It wasn't a question. I told her everything. The symbols, the sound, the eye. She listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When I finished, she walked to a locked cabinet and pulled out another folder. This one was newer, official looking, stamped with logos I didn't recognize. In 1995, the official explanation was environmental factors, Sarah said. Unusual weather patterns, contaminated food source, the kind of vague scientific hand-waving that means we have no idea what happened. But there was another team, federal. They came in after the biologists left, spent 3 months on the island. Then they classified everything and left. She opened the folder. Inside were documents, reports, and more photographs. The photographs showed the symbols, the same ones I had just seen, carved into the walls of every den where bears had died in 1995. And beneath the symbols, in the dens where they had dug deeper, the teams had found something else. Chambers, perfectly circular chambers cut into the bedrock. Empty, but not natural. The walls were smooth, too smooth, like they had been melted into shape. And in the center of each chamber was a depression, humanoid, like something had been lying there, waiting. The federal team sealed the dens, Sarah continued, filled them with concrete, marked them off limits, but they couldn't seal all of them. There are thousands of dens on this island. And 3 weeks ago, it started again. I asked her why she was telling me this, why she had brought me here. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much, because whatever is in those dens, whatever made those bears freeze with their eyes open, it is not done. And this time, it is not staying underground. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bear's frozen face. That eye, rotating to watch me. I kept telling myself it was impossible. A trick of the light. Adrenaline and fear playing games with my memory. But I knew what I had seen. At 3 a.m, I heard Sarah moving around in the main room of the cabin. I got up and found her at the radio, trying to reach someone. Anyone. But all we got was static. Storm coming in, she said, though the sky outside was clear. Radio has been spotty for days. She was lying. I could hear it in her voice. The radio wasn't too broken because of weather. Something else was interfering with it. Something that didn't want us calling for help. The next morning, We found tracks in the snow outside the cabin. Bear footprints, human-sized, but wrong. The proportions were off. Toes too long, stride too wide. They circled the cabin 3 times, then headed north into the forest. Sarah loaded her rifle without a word. We followed the tracks. They led us to another den, but this one was different. The entrance had been torn open from the inside. Dirt and rocks scattered across the snow. And leading away from the den, mixing with the humanoid tracks, were bear prints. Huge, fresh. That is impossible, I whispered. The bears are frozen. Sarah's face had gone pale. Not anymore. We found the bear a quarter mile into the forest. It was standing upright on its hind legs, swaying slightly, like it wasn't quite sure how to balance. Its fur was matted with ice. Its eyes were still frozen open, still showing that expression of absolute terror. But it was moving. It turned toward us with the jerky, unnatural movements of a puppet on strings. Its mouth opened, and that sound came out again. That wet, impossible breathing, but louder now, echoing through the trees. Sarah raised her rifle. I wanted to tell her to stop, that we should run, but my voice wouldn't work. She fired 3 times. Each shot hit center mass. The bear didn't even flinch. It just kept swaying, watching us. And behind it, emerging from the trees, were more. 5 bears, 10, 20, all moving with that same horrible jerking motion. All with their eyes frozen open in terror. All breathing that sound that wasn't breathing. We ran, I thought. Do you know how we made it back to the cabin? The bears didn't chase us exactly. They followed. Always just at the edge of vision. Always making that sound. By the time we barricaded the door, the sun was setting, and the forest around us was full of movement. Sarah was muttering to herself, checking and rechecking her ammunition. I pulled out my camera and reviewed the footage from the den. The symbols. I needed to understand what they meant. As I zoomed in on the clearest image, I noticed something I had missed before. The symbols weren't too random. They formed patterns, directions, and at the center of each spiral was a single mark that repeated throughout the den. A date, carved in numerals I could barely read, but unmistakable once I saw it. March 17th, 2025. Tomorrow. That is when Sarah screamed. I turned to find her at the window, her face pressed against the glass. Outside, in the darkness, were faces. Human faces, pressed against every window of the cabin. Not attacking, just watching. Their eyes wide, terrified, frozen. They were researchers, Sarah whispered. The federal team from 95. They never left the island. The faces began to move. Slowly, deliberately. Their mouths opened in unison, and that sound filled the night. That breathing that wasn't breathing. And I finally understood. Whatever had killed the bears, whatever had carved those symbols and hollowed out those chambers, hadn't been trying to hurt them. It had been trying to warn them. The bears had seen something in their hibernation dreams. Something so terrible that their bodies had frozen solid in pure instinctive terror. Something that was about to wake up. And we were standing right on top of it. The cabin floor began to shake. Story 7. Glowing herd. I never believed in ghosts until I spent 3 weeks on Amchitka Island. And by then, believing didn't matter anymore. The reindeer were real. That is what you need to understand first. Everything else that happened, everything I saw in those frozen woods at the edge of the world, it all started with something concrete. Something the government couldn't deny. The Department of Energy hired me as an environmental surveyor in September of last year. My job was simple: document wildlife patterns in formerly restricted zones across Alaska. Amchitka was supposed to be my last stop before heading home to Portland for the winter. 3 days of soil samples and photo surveys. Easy money. I should have read the files more carefully. Amchitka sits at the western tip of the Aleutian Islands, a strip of volcanic rock and tundra so remote that even the military abandoned it after the Cold War ended. Between 1965 and 1971, the Atomic Energy Commission detonated 3 nuclear bombs deep underground there. The largest, Kanakin, was 5 megatons. It cracked the island, this bedrock, and sent shockwaves that registered in Japan. They promised the radiation would stay contained. They promised a lot of things. I landed on the island on a Thursday afternoon. The helicopter pilot, a guy named Russ, who flown supply runs out here for 20 years, didn't say much during the flight. But as we descended toward the old airstrip, he leaned close and told me something I do never forget. He said that the reindeer on Amchitka weren't like other animals. He said they watched you differently. I laughed it off. I worked around wildlife my entire career. Deer, elk, caribou, they all had that same blank stare. Russ just shook his head and told me to keep my radio on after dark. The research station was a cluster of prefab buildings near the southern coast, half buried in moss and rust. Most of it had been gutted decades ago, but the main shelter still had power from a diesel generator and enough canned food to last a month. I set up my equipment and started my surveys that same evening. The island was beautiful in a desolate way. Endless rolling hills covered in thick grass, pockets of stunted trees, and fog that rolled in from the Bering Sea like a living thing. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, just wind. I saw the first reindeer on my second morning. I was hiking toward one of the old test sites, a fenced crater marked with radiation warnings that had faded to ghosts of their former brightness. The animal stood on a ridge about 50 yards away, perfectly still, watching me. It was a bull, massive, with a rack of antlers that spread wider than any eye be ever seen. And its eyes were wrong. Even in daylight, they had a faint luminescence, like the glow of a watch dial in a dark room. I raised my camera, but the moment I looked through the viewfinder, the reindeer turned and disappeared over the hill. I told myself it was a trick of the light, some kind of reflective tissue in the retina, maybe a mutation from the radiation. I heard stories about wildlife near Chernobyl, animals with strange coloring or extra limbs. This was probably similar, but when I mentioned it in my evening report to the satellite phone dispatcher, there was a long pause before she responded. She asked me if I'd seen more than one. I said no. She told me to note it in my log and move on. Her voice had an edge to it, like she was reading from a script. That night, I saw them for the first time as a herd. I'd gone outside around midnight to check the generator when I heard something moving in the darkness beyond the station lights. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling loose metal, but then I saw the glow. Dozens of pairs of eyes, suspended in the black, arranged in a semicircle around the perimeter. They didn't move. They didn't make a sound. They just stood there, watching. I counted at least 30 animals, maybe more. And in the center, towering above the rest, was the bull I'd seen that morning. His antlers seemed to shimmer with a faint blue light, like static electricity dancing across bone. I backed toward the door, my heart hammering. The moment I moved, every head turned in unison to track me. It was too coordinated, too deliberate. Deer scatter when they re-startled. These animals moved like a single organism. I locked myself inside and spent the rest of the night watching through the window, but they never came closer. By dawn, they were gone. The next day, I did what I should have done from the start. I pulled the old research files from the station, its archive room, boxes of moldy papers and deteriorating photographs that nobody had touched in decades. Most of it was technical data about seismic activity and radiation dispersal, but buried in the bottom of the third box, I found a personal journal. The name on the inside cover was Dr. Malcolm Hendricks, wildlife biologist, dated 1972 to 1974. The entries were handwritten, increasingly erratic toward the end. He'd been part of a team monitoring animal populations after the tests, specifically studying a herd of reindeer that had been introduced to the island in the 1950s as a food source for the military personnel. Hendricks wrote about the mutation starting to appear within a year of the Kannakin blast. Calves born with asymmetrical antlers, adults with fur that glowed faintly under UV light. Behavioral changes, too. The herd stopped migrating. They began moving in tight formations and seemed to anticipate the movements of the research team, avoiding traps and tranquilizers with unnatural precision. By 1973, Hendricks had become obsessed. His entries stopped being scientific observations and started reading like confessions. He wrote about feeling watched constantly. He wrote about dreams where he saw through the eyes of the reindeer running across the tundra with the herd. He wrote about the day he realized the radiation hadn't just changed their bodies. It had changed something deeper. The final entry was dated March 14, 1974. Hendricks wrote that he decided to stay on the island after the rest of the team evacuated. He said the reindeer needed him. He said they were calling to him at night, and he understood now what they wanted. The entry ended mid-sentence. There was no record of him ever leaving Amchitka. I checked the personnel logs. Malcolm Hendricks was listed as missing, presumed dead, in the spring of 1974. I should have called for an early extraction right then, but I was 5 days into a 14-day survey, and part of me still wanted to believe there was a rational explanation. Radiation-induced mutations were real. Strange animal behavior in contaminated zones was documented. I convinced myself that Hendricks had been isolated too long, that his journal was just the rambling of a man losing his grip on reality. I convinced myself right up until the night I followed them. It happened on my 8th night. I'd been lying awake, listening to the wind, when I heard it. A sound like singing, but not human. It was harmonic, multiple tones weaving together, rising and falling in patterns that felt almost like language. It came from the north, from the direction of the old nuclear test site. I grabbed my flashlight and thermal camera and went outside before I could talk myself out of it. The reindeer were waiting at the edge of the light, the same formation as before. But this time, when I stepped toward them, they turned and began walking away. Slowly, deliberately, they were leading me. I followed them across 2 miles of dark tundra, my equipment bouncing against my chest, my breath coming in ragged clouds. The singing grew louder as we approached the test site. The reindeer moved through the rusted fence like it wasn't there, and I squeezed through a gap behind them. The crater was maybe 200 feet across, a bowl-shaped depression filled with shallow water and strange vegetation I didn't recognize. The herd arranged itself around the rim, and in the center, standing in the water, was the bull. His antlers were brilliant now, crackling with blue-white light that illuminated the entire crater. And standing beside him, half submerged, was a man. At least, it had been a man once. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in rotting cold weather gear that hung from skeletal limbs. But the head was wrong. The skull had elongated, sprouting bone growths that curved upward like antlers, smaller than the reindeer, but unmistakable. The eyes glowed with the same ethereal light, and when it turned to look at me, I saw Malcolm Hendricks, name tag still pinned to his chest. He didn't speak, but I heard his voice in my head, clear as a radio transmission. He told me the radiation had done more than mutate tissue. It had bridged something, opened a connection between species that shouldn't exist. The reindeer had been changing him for years, absorbing him into their collective consciousness, and he let them. He said it was beautiful. He said the herd thought as one now, remembered as one, survived as one. He said they were the future of evolution, and I could join them if I wanted. All I had to do was step into the water. The bull took a step toward me, antlers crackling, and I felt something pulling at the edges of my mind. A warmth, a promise of belonging. For a moment, I almost did it. I almost walked into that glowing water and let whatever lived in the radiation take me. But then I looked at Hendricks again, really looked, and saw the horror beneath the peace. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His eyes, glowing and inhuman, still held a flicker of what he'd been. He transformed. He was trapped. I ran. I ran back across the tundra with the sound of hooves behind me. Ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Ran until I reached the station and barricaded myself inside. The reindeer surrounded the building for 3 days. I could see them through the windows, standing vigil, waiting. Hendricks came once, pressing his distorted face against the glass, antlers scraping the metal siding. I didn't look at him. I didn't listen to the voice in my head anymore. On the 4th morning, a storm rolled in from the sea, and when it cleared, they were gone. I called for an emergency extraction that afternoon. Russ came in low and fast, and I was in the air 15 minutes later with nothing but my cameras and Hendricks' journal. I filed my report. I sent the photos. The Department of Energy thanked me for my service and informed me that my contract was complete. They sent a check for the full 14 days and a non-disclosure agreement I signed without reading. Nobody asked about the reindeer. Nobody mentioned Malcolm Hendricks. But I still hear the singing sometimes. Late at night when I'm alone. I still see that blue light at the edge of my vision, and I wonder how long it takes. How long before the radiation finds its way into my cells, into my thoughts? How long before I start changing? Because I touched that water. Just for a second, when I fell running away, my hand broke the surface. And now, when I look in the mirror in the dark, I swear my eyes are starting to glow. Story 8. Reflection that stayed behind. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened on the Dalton Highway. When you look into a mirror and your reflection doesn't, to look away when you do, you don't, to question it at first. Your brain makes excuses, tricks of light, fatigue, anything but the truth. Anything but the possibility that something is looking back at you from the other side of the glass. My name is Marcus, and I'm a long-haul trucker. 42 years old. Been driving the roads between Fairbanks and Prudhoe Bay for the last 15 years. I know every truck stop, every rest area, every abandoned building along the Dalton Highway like I know the lines on my own face. Or at least, I thought I did. It was late October when I made the mistake that changed everything. The kind of mistake that seems reasonable at the time, the kind that gets you killed. My rig had been making a grinding sound for the last 100 miles, something in the transmission that I knew would get worse before it got better. I was still 200 miles from Coldfoot, and the sun was already dropping below the horizon. Up there, in the Arctic autumn, darkness comes fast and stays long. I needed to stop, to check the transmission before it seized completely and left me stranded in sub-zero temperatures with nothing but frozen tundra in every direction. That was when I saw the roadhouse. I had driven past it 1,000 times. Everyone had. It was a landmark of sorts. The old Caribou Creek Roadhouse, built back in the pipeline days of the 70s, abandoned since the late 90s when the owner disappeared and nobody wanted to buy a collapsing building in the middle of nowhere. Most of it had fallen in on itself years ago. Roof caved in, walls buckled, the kind of ruin that nature slowly reclaims one winter at a time. But one wall still stood. The north wall, perfectly intact, perfectly vertical, like it was defying gravity and time itself. I pulled off the highway onto what used to be a gravel lot, now just frozen mud and dead grass. The grinding sound from my transmission was getting worse. I grabbed my flashlight and toolkit and climbed out into air so cold it felt like breathing broken glass. The building looked even worse up close. The collapsed sections were buried under snow and debris. Broken furniture jutted out at odd angles. But that north wall stood there like a monument, and set into it, impossible as it seemed, was a mirror. Large, ornate, the kind you expect to find in an old hotel lobby, not a roadhouse in the Arctic. And it wasn't broken. Not a crack, not a scratch, just a perfect sheet of glass reflecting the twilight sky in my truck and me standing there like an idiot staring at it. I should have gotten back in my truck right then, fixed the transmission by the roadside, driven on, but I needed light. I needed space to work, and the section of the building around that mirror looked stable enough. The floor seemed solid. The ceiling above it, though sagging, was still holding. I convinced myself it was the smart choice, the practical choice. I was wrong. I set up my work light inside, angling it so I could see what I was doing with the toolkit. The mirror caught the light and threw it back, making the space brighter than it should have been. I remember thinking that was lucky. I remember being grateful. The transmission problem turned out to be simpler than I feared. A loose bolt, a minor adjustment, 30 minutes of work, maybe 45. I could be back on the road before full dark. I was lying on my back under the truck, wrench in hand, when I first felt it. The sensation of being watched. Every trucker knows that feeling. When you reel alone on the highway at 3 a.m. and you suddenly know, absolutely know, that you're not alone anymore. That something is paying attention to you. I slid out from under the truck and looked around. Nothing, just the collapsed building, the mirror, my work light throwing shadows, but the feeling didn't go away. I tried to focus on the work, tightened the bolt, checked the fluid levels, but my hands were shaking, and not from the cold. I kept glancing at the mirror. My reflection was there, doing exactly what I was doing. Moving when I moved, looking where I looked, except once, just once, for a fraction of a second, I saw my reflection turn its head before I turned mine. I froze, stared at the mirror. My reflection stared back, normal, perfectly synchronized, doing exactly what I was doing. But I knew what I had seen. That instant of disconnect, that impossible moment where my reflection had moved on its own. I told myself it was fatigue. 3 days of driving with maybe 10 hours of sleep total. The mind plays tricks. Everyone knows that. I finished the work as fast as I could, packed up my tools, and headed for the truck. That is when I heard it. A sound from deeper in the building. Not wind, not settling debris. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Moving through the collapsed sections where no one could possibly walk. I ran for my truck, got the door open, key in the ignition, and that is when my headlights swept across the mirror. My reflection was still standing in the building, watching me, not moving, not getting into the truck, just standing there with my face, my body, my clothes, staring out at me with an expression I had never made in my life. Pure hatred. I don't remember peeling out of that lot. I don't remember the first 50 miles back toward Fairbanks. The next thing I was consciously aware of was sitting in a truck stop outside of Cold Foot, my hands locked on the steering wheel, my entire body shaking. I told myself I had imagined it. Stress, fatigue, carbon monoxide from the exhaust somehow getting into my cab. Anything but what I had actually seen. I filled up on coffee and bad food and got back on the road. But the feeling of being watched never went away. That night, in a motel room in Fairbanks, I made the mistake of looking in the bathroom mirror. Really looking, studying my own face, searching for something I couldn't name. And for just a moment, my reflection smiled. A slow, cold smile that I wasn't making. I smashed that mirror with the base of the motel lamp, cut my hand on the glass, told the manager I had tripped and fallen into it, paid for the damage and left before dawn. For the next 3 days, I avoided mirrors, all of them, bathroom mirrors, rearview mirrors, store windows, anything that might show me my reflection. I kept my eyes down, focused on the road, told myself I just needed rest. A few days off the highway and everything would be fine. But I couldn't stop thinking about that roadhouse, about that impossible mirror standing intact in a building that should have collapsed decades ago, about my reflection standing there, watching me drive away. I started researching. Late nights in motel rooms, digging through old news archives and trucker forums and local history websites. And I found things I wish I hadn't. The Caribou Creek Roadhouse had a history. The owner, a man named Robert Finch, had disappeared in 1998. Just vanished one winter night. His truck was still parked outside. The building was locked from the inside. But Finch was gone. They searched for weeks. Never found a body. Never found evidence of foul play. He had simply ceased to exist. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was what the investigators found inside. Mirrors, dozens of them, covering every wall of the main room, all facing each other, creating an infinite regression of reflections. And in the center of the room, Finch's jacket, folded neatly, with a note in the pocket. The note was only 2 words. It doesn't follow. The building was sold to a developer who planned to renovate it. But within a month, 3 of his workers had quit. They wouldn't say why, just packed up their tools and left. The developer tried to demolish the place, but the equipment kept breaking down. Excavators, bulldozers, even a wrecking ball, all of it failed. And that north wall, the one with the big mirror, refused to come down. Eventually, they just gave up and let nature take its course. But here is what made my blood run cold. I found a trucker forum from 2006, a thread about the roadhouse, about the mirror, and in that thread were dozens of posts. Truckers who had stopped there, who had seen things in that mirror, reflections that moved wrong, reflections that stayed behind. And at the bottom of the thread, a post from a user named BigRig79. He had stopped at the roadhouse in 2005, looked in the mirror, seen his reflection act independently. He wrote about it, asked if anyone else had experienced the same thing. His last post was 3 days later. Just one sentence. It followed me home. BigRig79 never posted again. And when someone tried to track him down a year later, they found that his truck had been discovered abandoned on the side of the Dalton Highway. Door open, engine running, but the driver was gone. Vanished. Just like Robert Finch, I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. This was insane. Impossible. Reflections done to come to life. They done to follow people. They were just light and glass and physics. But I knew what I had seen. And I knew what I was feeling. Something was watching me. And it was getting closer. That night, I covered every reflective surface in my motel room. Towels over the TV screen. Shirt over the bathroom mirror. I even covered the window to block out any possible reflection from the parking lot lights. I lay in bed in total darkness, listening to every creak and groan of the building, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, exhausted and paranoid, I made a decision. I was going back to the roadhouse. I needed to know what I had seen. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. And maybe, somewhere in that ruined building, I would find answers. I packed my bag, loaded the truck, and headed north on the Dalton Highway as the sun climbed weakly over the horizon. The drive felt longer than it should have. Every mile stretched out. Every landmark seemed unfamiliar, like the road itself was trying to keep me away from that place. But I pushed through, gripped the wheel, kept my eyes forward, and absolutely refused to look at my rearview mirror. When I finally reached the roadhouse, it was late afternoon. The sun was already starting its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The building looked exactly as I had left it, collapsed, ruined, except for that one perfect wall with its impossible mirror. I grabbed my flashlight and approached slowly. The wind had picked up, blowing snow across the frozen ground in swirling patterns. The building groaned, but that wall stood silent and still. I stepped through the collapsed entrance, glass crunching under my boots. The mirror was there, reflecting the dying sunlight, reflecting me standing in the doorway. I looked tired, scared, like a man who had aged years in a handful of days. I aimed my flashlight around the room. In the wreckage, I could see the remains of other mirrors. Smashed, scattered, buried under debris. This had been the mirror room, the place where Robert Finch had surrounded himself with reflections. Why? What had he been looking for? I found the answer carved into the wall behind where the bar used to stand. Words scratched into the wood with something sharp, desperate, frantic. They replace us one reflection at a time. They study, they learn, they wait, and then they switch places. The reflection becomes real. The real becomes the reflection, trapped on the other side of the glass, watching their life stolen by something wearing their face. My hand started shaking. The flashlight beam danced across the words. Below that message was another, fresher, carved with a different tool in a different hand. If you see yourself move wrong, Dawn, to go home. Dawn, let it learn more. Break every mirror. It's the only way. That message was dated 2005, the same year Big Rig 79 had posted on the forum. And once it knows you well enough, once it can copy every gesture and expression and thought, the switch will happen. It'll become the reflection, and it will become you. I think my time is running out. I can hear it breathing on the other side of the door. My breathing, my rhythm, perfect, except I am holding my breath. If anyone finds this recording, if anyone hears my voice, I need you to know something. If you see me after today, if you run into Marcus driving the Dalton Highway or sitting in a truck stop or living in this house, look at my eyes. Really look, because it won to be me. It will be the thing that learned how to be me, the thing from the other side of the glass. And by then, I'll be trapped in there, in every reflection, watching my life continue without me, screaming warnings that no one can hear. The doorknob is turning. I am out of time, and I still don't. The most terrifying part. How long ago did the switch actually happen? Was it at the Roadhouse? The motel? Or has it already happened? And the thing recording this message is just making one final joke before it disappears into my life forever? Look in the mirror tonight. Really look. And ask yourself the question I can to answer anymore. Are you really you? Story 9. Thing in the whiteout, I need you to understand something about Denali before I tell you what happened up there. The mountain does not care about you. It does not care if you are experienced or prepared or lucky. When the weather turns, when the whiteout comes, you stop being a person. You become food for the cold. I was part of the rescue team that found them in May of 2003. 4 climbers from a party of 5, huddled together at 17,000 feet on the Denali Pass, wrapped in torn sleeping bags and shredded tents. When we reached them, they were drawing in the snow with their frostbitten fingers. All 4 of them, the same image, over and over, a tall figure made of curved lines and spirals. And in the center, where the face should be, just a dark circle. A hole. They would not stop drawing it. Even when we tried to get them into the rescue sleds, they fought us, screaming and clawing at the snow to finish their pictures. It took 3 of us to restrain each climber. Their fingers were black with frostbite, some of the nails already gone, but they kept scratching at the ice until we sedated them. The missing climber was named Marcus Webb, 38 years old, an accountant from Denver with 6 successful summit attempts under his belt. He knew the mountain. He knew the risks. According to the GPS data from his watch, his last recorded position was inside the tent with the others. Then the signal just stopped. Not like his battery died. The data stream just ended mid-transmission, like he had ceased to exist. We searched for 3 days. Found nothing. No tracks, no equipment, no body. The storm had been severe. Winds hitting 90 miles per hour, visibility down to 0. But even in those conditions, a body does not just vanish. Equipment gets scattered. Clothing gets found. Something always remains. The 4 survivors spent 2 weeks in the hospital in Anchorage. Severe frostbite, psychological trauma, what the doctors called acute stress disorder with shared psychotic features. That last part is important. Shared psychotic features. It means they all saw the same hallucination. They all experienced the same delusion. Except it was not a delusion. I know because I saw it too. It happened on the second night of the search. We had set up camp at 16,000 feet, waiting for the weather to clear enough to continue looking for Marcus. The wind had died down to a steady howl. Snow fell in thick sheets, turning everything beyond 10 feet into white static. I was on watch, sitting in the vestibule of my tent, scanning the darkness with my headlamp. That is when I noticed the snow was moving wrong. I have been on Denali 14 times. I know how snow behaves in wind. It drifts and swirls and follows patterns. But this was different. About 30 yards from camp, the falling snow was gathering into a shape, collecting, forming something vertical and impossibly thin. Like watching a person being assembled from particles of ice. My first thought was that I was seeing a trick of the light. My second thought was that I needed to wake the others. But I could not move. I sat there watching as the shape became more defined. Taller than any person, maybe 8 or 9 feet. So thin it should not have been able to stand. And where the head should be, where I expected to see features or at least the suggestion of a face, there was just darkness. A void. A hole in the storm that did not reflect light. It stood there for maybe 30 seconds. Then it moved. Not walked, moved. It glided across the snow without disturbing the surface, getting closer to our camp. My headlamp beam passed right through it like it was made of nothing. But I could see it blocking the snow behind it. I could see the shape of it interrupting the storm. I finally managed to move. I scrambled backward into my tent and zipped it shut like fabric would protect me from whatever that thing was. I lay there in my sleeping bag, listening to the wind, waiting for something to tear through the tent wall. Waiting for the cold to find me. Nothing happened. Eventually I convinced myself I had imagined it. Altitude sickness, exhaustion. The mind plays tricks above 15,000 feet. I did not mention it to the others in the morning, but then we found Marcus, his camera. It was half buried in snow about 100 yards from where the tents had been. The camera was expensive, professional grade, supposedly weatherproof. The case was intact, but when we opened it, the electronics inside had been destroyed. Not by impact or water. They looked like they had been flash frozen and then shattered from the inside. The SD card was ruined too. Completely unreadable, except for one image. The last photo Marcus took before his camera died. We did not see it until we got back to base camp and gave the card to our tech specialist who managed to pull a partial recovery. The image was blurred, probably taken while Marcus was moving or falling. But you could make out shapes. The interior of a tent, sleeping bags, and in the entrance, barely visible through the storm, a tall, thin figure. The photo was too degraded to show details, but you could see the basic form. And in the center, where the face should be, the image file was corrupted. Just a circle of dead pixels. Black. That photo never made it into the official report. Our team leader confiscated it, said it would upset the families and raise questions we could not answer. He was probably right. How do you explain a photograph of something that should not exist? The survivors started talking after about a week in the hospital. They all told the same story with the same details, which should have been impossible given their mental states. They said the storm hit without warning. One minute they were setting up camp. The next they were being hammered by winds strong enough to tear the tents apart. They managed to get inside and zip up before the worst of it arrived. They huddled together for warmth, waiting it out. That is when Marcus saw it outside. He looked through the tent window and went completely still. The others asked what he was seeing, but he would not answer. He just stared out into the whiteout with his face pressed against the fabric. Then he started to leave. He unzipped the tent, letting the storm pour in, and began crawling outside. The others grabbed him, tried to pull him back, but he fought them with a strength that should not have been possible at that altitude in those conditions. He kicked free and disappeared into the white. They sealed the tent again and tried to wait it out. But then they started seeing it too. Through the window, through gaps in the torn fabric. A shape in the storm. Tall and thin and made of swirling snow. It circled their tent for hours. They said they could hear it over the wind. Not footsteps, something else. A sound like ice crystals scraping against each other. Like the voice of the storm itself. Every time it passed the tent, they felt the temperature drop even further. Their breath froze mid-exhale. The water in their bottles turned to solid ice in seconds. One of them, a woman named Sarah Chen, said she felt it looking at her. She said the hole in its face was not empty. Something was inside it, something vast and cold and aware. The storm lasted 14 hours. When it finally cleared, they found themselves alone. Marcus was gone. Their tents were shredded. Half their gear was missing. And they were all drawing the same image in the snow without realizing they were doing it. They did not remember starting. They just looked down and their fingers were moving, scratching the same pattern into the ice over and over. The official explanation was shared hallucination brought on by altitude sickness, hypothermia, and stress. The drawing was explained as a psychological coping mechanism. Marcus was declared missing, presumed dead from exposure. The case was closed, but I started looking into the history of that area. The Denali Pass has always been dangerous. High winds, extreme cold, unpredictable weather. Dozens of people have died there over the years. What I found was a pattern in the deaths. Every few years, someone vanishes during a whiteout. Not killed by a fall or an avalanche. Just gone. And almost every time, the survivors report the same thing. A shape in the storm. A figure that should not exist. The local rangers know about it. They will not talk about it officially, but if you buy them enough drinks, they will admit they have seen things up there. Shapes in the snow that move against the wind. Sounds that do not match anything natural. Areas where the temperature drops for no reason and climbers report feeling watched. The native Athabascan people who lived in the shadow of Denali for thousands of years have stories about something they call the snowwalker. They say it is not a spirit or a creature. It is something older, something that exists in the spaces between storms, in the white emptiness where earth and sky become the same thing. They say it was here before the mountain, before the ice, and it will be here after both are gone. I tried to move on, tried to convince myself that what I saw was exhaustion or altitude or fear. But then 6 months later, I was leading another rescue on the mountain. Different team, different location, lower altitude. We were bringing down a climber with pulmonary edema when the weather shifted. A sudden whiteout that came out of nowhere. And I saw it again. This time it was closer, maybe 20 feet away, tall and impossibly thin, made of spinning snow that somehow held a shape. The hole in its face was darker than before, deeper. I could feel it pulling at me, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff. Like gravity had shifted and was trying to drag me forward into that darkness. My radio crackled. One of my team members was asking if I could see something in the storm. Another voice cut in, panicked, saying they needed to get off the mountain immediately. Everyone could see it. We were all looking at the same impossible thing. It moved closer. The temperature plummeted. My breath crystallized instantly. Ice formed on my goggles. I could hear that sound again, the scraping crystal voice, and underneath it something else. Words. Not in any language I recognized, but I understood them anyway. It was calling us, inviting us to step forward, to look into the hole and see what was waiting on the other side. One of our team members started walking toward it. We had to tackle him, drag him back to the sleds. He fought us the whole way down, screaming that we did not understand, that it was beautiful, that it wanted to show us something we needed to see. We got everyone down safely. The climber with pulmonary edema survived. The team member who tried to walk into the storm was hospitalized for psychological evaluation. He was released after 2 weeks. Last I heard, he moved to Alaska and started climbing Denali regularly. Alone, in winter, he has been caught multiple times trying to reach the upper slopes during storm warnings. I quit mountain rescue after that. Could not do it anymore. Could not go back up there knowing what was waiting in the whiteouts. But I still think about Marcus Webb, about what happened to him when he crawled out into that storm. I think he is still up there. Not dead, not exactly. I think he stepped through that hole and found something on the other side. Something that exists in the white space between existence and nothing. And I think whatever that thing is, it is still looking for more people to show. Because here's what nobody talks about. Here's the detail that keeps me up at night. When we finally recovered Marcus' body 3 years later, after a glacier released it from the ice, the autopsy showed something wrong. His body was preserved perfectly. No decomposition at all. But his eyes were open and his pupils were completely white. Not clouded like cataracts. White like they had been replaced with snow. And when the medical examiner looked into those white eyes with his instruments, he said he could see shapes moving in there. Impossible shapes, like looking into a storm that never ended. They cremated the body immediately. Burned it without letting the family see. The official cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma and exposure. But I saw the preliminary report before it was classified. The examiner wrote one line at the end that was later redacted. He wrote that Marcus Webb had died from looking at something the human eye was not meant to see. I am telling you this because Denali is still there. The whiteouts still come. And every season, new climbers go up thinking they understand the risks. They know about the cold and the altitude and the storms. But they do not know about the thing that lives in the white. The thing that has always been there, waiting in the spaces where visibility drops to zero and direction loses meaning. If you ever find yourself on that mountain, if the storm closes in and the world turns white, do not look for shapes in the snow. Do not try to understand what you are seeing. And if you see something tall and thin with a hole where its face should be, do not look into it. Do not try to understand what is on the other side. Just close your eyes and wait for the storm to pass, because some doors should never be opened. Some invitations should never be accepted. And some things should remain hidden in the white, where they have always been, where they will always be, waiting for the next person who looks too long into the storm. Story 10. Breathtaker. The ice fog took my brother on January 7th, and I watched it happen through my truck windshield, unable to do anything but scream. That's the part nobody believes when I tell this story. They think I'm making excuses, that I panicked or froze up or just didn't try hard enough to save him. But you don't understand what the fog is like in Fairbanks in the dead of winter. You don't understand that some things up here aren't natural, no matter what the weather service tells you. The locals know. They've known for generations. But nobody talks about it openly, because talking about it means admitting that something lives in the cold, something that hunts when the temperature drops below 40 below zero and the air itself turns into a frozen white wall that swallows everything. I moved to Fairbanks from Seattle 3 years ago for work. I am a telecommunications engineer, and the job paid nearly double what I was making down south. My brother Danny followed me up 6 months later after his divorce cleaned him out. He needed a fresh start, and I needed help with the mortgage on the house I bought just outside the city. It seemed perfect. We spent our first winter together learning how to plug in our trucks at night so the engines wouldn't defreeze, how to layer clothing properly, how to navigate when the sun only showed up for 3 hours a day. It was brutal, but it was also kind of exciting. We felt like pioneers, like we were tough enough to handle something most Americans couldn't. The old-timers at the bar tried to warn us. There was this guy, Frank, who lived in Fairbanks for 40 years. He pulled me aside one night in December and told me about the fog. Not the regular ice fog that happens when the temperature inverts and moisture freezes into tiny crystals that hang in the air. He meant something else. He said there were nights when the fog came down so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and on those nights, you stayed inside no matter what. He said the fog was hungry. He said it moved with purpose, that it would find you if you were out in it, and when it did, it would take your breath. Literally, he lost a cousin to it in 1987. They found her in her car 2 blocks from home, frozen solid, her mouth open like she was trying to scream. The coroner said her lungs were completely dry, like all the moisture had been pulled out through her throat. Frank told me to watch the temperature, and if it ever dropped below 45 below, to stay home and keep the doors locked. I thought he was just trying to scare the newcomers. People love doing that in Alaska, seeing how much they can freak out the tourists and transplants. But Danny took it seriously. He started checking the weather obsessively, reading forums about unexplained deaths in Fairbanks winters, digging through old newspaper archives at the library. He found a pattern. Every 5 to 7 years, during the coldest stretch of winter, someone would disappear in the fog. Sometimes multiple people. They'd be found days later, sometimes weeks, frozen in their cars or in snowbanks just off the road. Always the same details. No moisture in the lungs. Expressions of absolute terror. And always during the densest ice fog events, when the visibility dropped to zero and the temperature hit record lows. Danny became convinced it was real. He started calling it the breathtaker, like it was some kind of entity. I told him he was losing it, that he was reading too much into coincidences and urban legends. People died in Alaska winters all the time. Cars broke down. Heaters failed. Folks made bad decisions. That was reality. Not some ghost story about sentient fog. But Danny wouldn't let it go. He said he felt something watching him one night when he'd gone out to start his truck during a cold snap. He said the fog had moved toward him, against the wind, like it was alive. He'd run back inside and stayed there until morning. I should have listened to him. I should have paid attention when the Weather Service issued the extreme cold warning on January 6th. 50 below zero expected overnight, possible ice fog in low-lying areas. Danny wanted to stay home from work the next day, but I convinced him it would be fine. The shop where he worked was only 10 miles away, straight shot down the highway. We'd just leave early, before the fog got bad. It was a decision that plays over and over in my head every single night. We left at 5 in the morning, when it was still dark. The temperature gauge on my truck read 47 below. The air hurt to breathe, even through a scarf. We drove in convoy, Danny following me in his pickup, and for the first few miles everything was clear. The stars were out, sharp and bright in that way they only get in extreme cold. I remember thinking we made it, that Danny's paranoia had been for nothing. Then we came around a bend, and the fog was just there, a solid white wall across the highway. I hit my brakes, and Danny stopped behind me. The fog hadn't been there 30 seconds before. It had appeared like someone had drawn a curtain across the road. I grabbed my radio and told Danny to turn around, that we should head back and call in sick. But before he could respond, the fog started moving. Not drifting, not blowing. Moving. It rolled toward us in a wave, thick and low to the ground, and even through my closed windows I could feel the temperature drop. My breath started fogging inside the truck despite the heater running full blast. I threw my truck in reverse and gunned it, watching Danny do the same in my mirrors. But the fog was faster. It caught his truck first, swallowing the taillights in seconds. I kept backing up, but then my truck slid on ice and I had to stop to correct. That's when the fog reached me. It pressed against the windows like something solid, like hands pushing against the glass. The temperature inside the cab dropped so fast that frost started forming on the inside of the windshield. I cranked the heat higher, but it didn't matter. My breath was coming out in thick white plumes, and each exhale seemed to get pulled toward the windows, toward the fog outside. I tried to call Danny on the radio, but all I got was static. I couldn't see anything beyond 3 feet. The world had become nothing but white, and then I heard the sound. It was like breathing, but huge, like the fog itself was inhaling and exhaling. The truck started rocking gently, and I realized something was circling it, moving around the vehicle in a slow, deliberate pattern. I locked the doors even though I knew it was stupid, that locks wouldn't matter if the fog could get through glass. That was when I saw Danny. Just for a second, the fog thinned enough for me to see his truck about 20 feet ahead. He was still in the driver's seat, but something was wrong. His window was down, not broken, not shattered, just down. And the fog was pouring into the cab, thick tendrils of white that moved like tentacles, wrapping around his head and chest. I saw him struggling, saw his hands clawing at his throat, saw his mouth open wide. But no sound came out. The fog was pulling something from him, streams of white vapor that looked like breath but was too much, too continuous. It was draining him. I grabbed my door handle. I was going to run out there, going to pull him out of the truck somehow. But the moment my hand touched the metal, the fog pressed harder against my windows. Cracks started forming in the glass, hairline fractures spreading like spider webs. And I understood that if I opened that door, if I let the fog inside, I would die. Not might die, would die. The certainty of it hit me like a physical force. This thing was intelligent. It was waiting. It wanted me to try to save Danny so it could take us both. I sat there, frozen, my hand on the door, watching my brother die. It took maybe 30 seconds. His struggles got weaker, then stopped. His body went rigid, and even through the fog I could see frost forming on his skin, spreading across his face and hands like he was turning to ice from the inside out. Then the fog pulled back, retreating from his truck, and I saw him clearly. He was frozen solid, his face locked in an expression of pure terror. His mouth stretched impossibly wide. His eyes were still open, still aware somehow, and they were looking right at me, accusing me, asking me why I didn't help. The fog released my truck at the same time. It rolled back away from the highway, disappearing into the tree line like it had never been there. The sun was starting to rise, and in the growing light everything looked normal. Just a cold January morning on an empty road. I sat there for 10 minutes before I could move. Then I got out and walked to Danny's truck. The door was frozen shut, but through the window I could see him clearly. The coroner's report would later say he died of exposure, that his window had malfunctioned and he defrozen to death in minutes. But I saw his lungs through his open mouth. They were gray and shriveled, completely desiccated. Every bit of moisture had been pulled out of them. I tried to tell the police what really happened. They were patient, sympathetic even. They said trauma could cause false memories, that the extreme cold could create hallucinations. They said ice fog was a known phenomenon, that it could appear suddenly and create zero visibility. They said Danny had probably panicked when his window failed, that he hyperventilated and the cold had done the rest. They took my statement and sent me to a counselor who prescribed medication for PTSD. Nobody believed me. Nobody except Frank. He came to Danny's funeral, pulled me aside afterward, and told me I'd done the right thing by staying in the truck. He said the fog had probably been watching us for weeks, waiting for the right conditions. He said it fed on warmth, on the heat that came from living things, and that it was drawn to breath, to that warm, moist air that came from lungs. He said the people it took were found with dry lungs because the fog literally drained them, pulled every bit of moisture and heat from their bodies until there was nothing left. He said his cousin had rolled down her window to try to clear the fog from her windshield, and the fog had poured inside. He said she probably died screaming, but no sound could escape because the fog had already stolen her breath. Frank told me there were stories about the fog going back to the gold rush days. Native tribes in the area had legends about a winter spirit that hunted in the deepest cold, a being made of frozen air that consumed the warmth of living things. The early miners called it the White Death. It showed up in the historical records as unexplained deaths during cold snaps, always the same pattern. People found frozen with no moisture in their lungs. The reports stopped appearing in newspapers around the 1950s, not because the deaths stopped, but because people stopped talking about them. It was bad for business, bad for the reputation of a city trying to convince people to move north. So the deaths got explained away as accidents, as equipment failures, as poor judgment. But the old families knew. They taught their children to respect the fog, to fear it, to stay inside when it came. I moved back to Seattle 3 weeks after the funeral. I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't stay in a city where winter meant something might come out of the cold and hunt you. I sold everything and left. But I still think about Danny every day. I still see his face through that window, still hear the sound of that breathing fog circling my truck. And I wonder if he blamed me in those last seconds, if he understood why I didn't try to save him. The counselor said I need to forgive myself, that there was nothing I could have done. But she doesn't, you know what I know? She doesn't, that I felt relief when the fog took Danny first. For just a moment, when I saw it pouring into his truck instead of mine, I was grateful. I was glad it was him and not me. That is the thought I can to escape. That is the real horror. Not the fog, not the death, but the fact that when survival was on the line, I chose myself without hesitation. Sometimes, on cold winter nights in Seattle, I see fog rolling down the street and my heart starts racing. It's not the same fog, could possibly be the same thing, but I lock my doors anyway. I check that my windows are sealed. I keep the heat running even though it is expensive, because I know now what lives in the deepest cold. I know that there are things in this world that hunger for what we have, for our warmth, for our breath, for the simple fact that we re-alive. And I know that when those things come for you, there is no fighting them. There is only the choice of who dies first. Danny made me promise once, back before it happened, that if anything ever came for us in the fog, I'd try to save him. He made me swear I wouldn't leave him behind. I promised because it seemed ridiculous at the time, because I didn't believe any of it. But when the moment came, when that fog was draining the life from him and I had my hand on the door, I broke that promise. I let him die alone because I wanted to live, and that is something I have to carry forever. The temperature in Fairbanks dropped to 53 below zero the night after Danny died. The fog came back, thicker than before, and 2 more people disappeared. A college student walking home from the library, an old woman who went out to get her mail. They found them both 3 days later, frozen solid, their lungs dry as paper. The news called it a tragic accident. The police called it a terrible coincidence. But Frank called me and told me the fog was still hungry, that it wouldn't stop until the cold broke. He said it had probably been satisfied by Danny, that it had gotten what it needed and moved on to others. He said I should feel lucky. But I don't feel lucky. I feel haunted, not by the fog, but by my own reflection in that truck window, by the look on my face when I decided to live instead of die trying to save my brother. That's the real monster in this story. Not some entity made of frozen air, but the animal instinct that lives inside all of us, the part that will sacrifice anyone and anything to survive just one more day. The fog just brought it out. The fog just made me see what I really am. I still check the weather in Fairbanks sometimes, late at night when I can, to sleep. I watch the temperature drop and wonder if anyone else is out there in the fog right now, watching someone they love get taken while they sit behind locked doors. I wonder if they they'll all make the same choice I did. I wonder if they will all be able to live with it afterward. And I wonder, on the coldest nights, if the fog remembers me. If it's waiting for the day I come back north, waiting to finish what it started, waiting to take the breath it left behind. And now the snow closes in, the path gone behind us. If you felt the cold tonight, subscribe and turn on notifications. More stories are waiting just beyond the tree line. Drop your own strange experiences or your location in the comments. It's how we keep the whispers alive. Midnight Whispers isn't just a story. It's a thread in the dark that connects us. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your back to the wind.